Have you ever had a dream, something crazy that you thought, nah, this will never happen? Well, that was me, until one day, everything changed. My neighbors laughed at my idea, but oh, just wait, until they saw my harvest. So here's the story. I'm not one for conventional hobbies. While most people around here were into things like sports or gardening, I had this wild vision. I decided I wanted to grow my own food. But not just any food. I wanted to grow the biggest and most unique crops in the neighborhood. It all started with a simple idea. What if I could create something that would blow everyone's minds? It wasn't about the space or the soil, it was about ambition. What could I achieve if I pushed the limits? Now at this point you might be thinking, okay Darlene, what makes you think you can pull this off? Good question. And here's the thing. I didn't have all the answers. In fact, I didn't even know what I was doing at first, but that's what made it exciting. There's this incredible feeling when you start something new and there are no rules, no limitations. You get to be creative. I mean, sure, I didn't have experience with huge crops or anything, but that didn't stop me from dreaming big. I started doing tons of research. I spent hours watching videos, reading books, and talking to people who had experience in growing massive vegetables. I took notes. I learned about the best types of soil, the right fertilizers, the best planting techniques, and even the kind of weather that would work best for my crops. I was ready to invest everything I had into making this vision come to life. And of course I had doubts. What if it didn't work? What if I failed? But those thoughts were fleeting. I realized that if I wanted to make this vision a reality, I had to push those doubts aside and go for it with everything I had. So I got to work. I started small, planting a few test crops, things like squash and pumpkins. And not just any pumpkins, no, I was going for the biggest pumpkins I could find. I wanted to see how far I could push this. But here's the thing, not everything was smooth sailing. There were moments where I wondered if I had bitten off more than I could chew. The seeds weren't growing the way I expected. The weather was all over the place, and pests started showing up like they owned the place. It wasn't easy, but every little setback just made me more determined to figure it out. I remember this one day in particular. Everything was going wrong. The pumpkins weren't growing fast enough, and the soil wasn't quite right. I could hear the neighbors laughing from across the street, thinking I'd give up and drop the whole idea. They had no idea what I was really capable of. And as I stood there, staring at my garden, it hit me. This is my chance to show them. I wasn't about to quit. I was going to turn this into something big, something no one could ignore. And that's exactly what I did. All right, let's rewind a bit. As I was diving headfirst into this garden project, I didn't expect it to be all sunshine and rainbows. Sure, I had big dreams, but I was also prepared for the fact that most people around me wouldn't exactly share my enthusiasm. When I first told my neighbors about what I was planning, they gave me the most doubtful looks. Now you have to understand, the people around here weren't exactly used to seeing anyone try something that wasn't the norm. Most of them had their typical suburban gardens, nothing too wild. They grew their flowers, a few veggies here and there, and that was it. But I wasn't aiming for ordinary. I wanted my garden to be unforgettable. I wanted to grow the biggest, most unique crops anyone had ever seen. I didn't just want to grow food for the sake of it. No, I wanted to create a garden that would make people say, wow, I didn't even know this was possible. It wasn't about the space or the soil, it was about the idea. Now at this point you might be thinking, okay Darlene, what makes you think you can pull this off? Good question. And here's the thing, I didn't have all the answers. In fact, I didn't even know what I was doing at first. But that's what made it exciting. There's this incredible feeling when you start something new, and there are no rules, no limitations. You get to be creative. I mean, sure, I didn't have experience with huge crops or anything, but that didn't stop me from dreaming big. When I told them, they didn't exactly respond the way I expected. Some of them chuckled, others just raised an eyebrow, and a few even straight up laughed. You want to grow giant pumpkins? Good luck with that, they said. That's impossible, nobody does that around here. I mean, I get it. The idea of growing these massive crops in a suburban neighborhood where the soil wasn't exactly perfect for it? Yeah, it did sound pretty wild. But it's like they say, if you have a big vision, people are often going to doubt you. And when they doubt you, they laugh. It's almost like a defense mechanism. But here's the thing, every time they laughed, it only fueled my determination. I wasn't about to back down just because a few people didn't believe it was possible. That was the exact moment I knew I was on the right track. Because I wasn't trying to prove them wrong, I was trying to prove to myself that I could do something bigger than anyone had ever imagined. Okay, so now we're getting to the fun part, the breakthrough. After weeks of uncertainty, I finally started to see results. Let me paint the picture for you. It wasn't just a little sprout here or there. No, this was next-level growth. I mean, my garden was going from meh to wow real fast. And it wasn't just one or two plants. I had full-on, giant pumpkins and veggies that looked like something out of a fantasy movie. You know how they say, don't count your chickens before they hatch? Well, that's exactly how I felt at first. I was excited, sure, but also trying not to get my hopes up too soon. But as days passed, I noticed the pumpkins were getting bigger and bigger. It wasn't just in my head. These things were actually growing at an insane rate. They were huge, bigger than I ever expected, bigger than anything I had ever seen in a backyard garden. I remember the first time I looked at one of my pumpkins and thought, is this even real? It was so big that I literally had to step back to take it all in. It looked like something out of a competitive gardening contest, not something that belonged in my backyard. I couldn't believe it. For the first time, I saw the vision I had in my head coming to life, and it was more incredible than I could have imagined. But it wasn't just the size that amazed me. It was the quality too. These weren't just giant pumpkins. They were perfect. They had this deep, vibrant color, and the vines were thick and healthy. It was clear that all my hard work, my trial and error, and my persistence had paid off. This wasn't just a victory for me. It was proof that anything is possible if you're willing to work for it. Now, I'm not going to lie, there were moments when I doubted myself. I thought maybe I was just getting lucky. But as I watched these crops continue to grow, my confidence started building up. I wasn't lucky. I was just doing the right things. The research I had done, the changes I made along the way, and the consistency of my efforts were finally showing results. It was like everything I had put into this garden was now paying me back in ways I couldn't have imagined. The moment had finally arrived. After all the sweat, the doubts, and the endless hours spent in my garden, it was time to show everyone what I had accomplished. I had been dreaming of this moment for weeks, maybe even months. The entire neighborhood was about to see the fruits of my labor, and believe me, it wasn't just a little garden anymore. This was a game changer. I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. The neighbors who once laughed at me were about to get a front row seat to what could only be described as a garden miracle. I carefully wheeled the cart out to the front of my yard, the giant pumpkins rolling gently in their makeshift crates. They were massive, with deep orange hues that almost glowed in the sunlight. I took a deep breath and braced myself. This was it. No turning back now. As I started setting everything up, I couldn't help but notice the looks from across the street. I saw the familiar faces peeking through their windows, some even slowly walking towards the fence to see what was going on. Their curiosity was building, but they had no idea what was about to unfold. My heart raced as I arranged the pumpkins in neat rows, making sure they were perfectly placed for maximum effect. I was giving them the full show. The neighbors who had once doubted me, who had laughed at my silly idea, were now standing there, their expressions unreadable. Some of them tried to keep their distance, trying to act like they weren't that interested, but I could see their eyes following every movement, their heads tilted, probably thinking, is this for real? For a second, I stood there, just taking it all in. The silence was almost deafening. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when someone is trying to wrap their minds around something that seems impossible. My garden had become something they couldn't ignore, and it was real. The pumpkins, the veggies, they were all bigger, more vibrant, and more impressive than anyone had expected. It felt like a movie scene where the underdog finally steps into the spotlight and shines. Then slowly the whispers began. "Is that a pumpkin?" one neighbor asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "That thing looks like it belongs in a competition." I could feel the energy in the air shift. The skepticism started to melt away, replaced by awe and genuine curiosity. The same people who laughed and rolled their eyes at my crazy idea now couldn't take their eyes off the giant pumpkins. Some were snapping pictures with their phones. Others were trying to figure out how in the world I pulled this off. One neighbor who had been particularly vocal about my silly dream came up to me, her eyes wide with surprise. "I didn't think you could actually do it," she admitted, clearly in awe. "These are incredible. You've really outdone yourself." And you know what? It felt so good to hear that. Not because I was gloating, but because it was validation of all the hard work, all the late nights, and all the time I had spent doubting myself. This was proof that persistence pays off. But here's the twist. This wasn't just about the pumpkins. This was about showing everyone that when you dream big and commit to your goals, anything is possible. It was a moment of triumph, not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been told they couldn't do something. I could see it in their faces. They were amazed, but they were also inspired. Some of the neighbors were now talking to each other about starting their own little projects, asking me for tips, asking me how they could grow their own giant pumpkins. I'd gone from the person they'd laughed at to the person they were now looking to for advice. It felt surreal, but it was also incredibly rewarding. Looking around at the smiling faces, I realized that the moment wasn't just about proving my neighbors wrong. It was about showing them that you don't have to settle for the ordinary. You can aim high, work hard, and make your dreams come true, even if people laugh at you in the beginning. Because at the end of the day, it's your effort, your dedication, and your belief in yourself that will take you further than anyone's doubts ever could.